really difficult to transition from being more of a journalist to someone who is supposed to be sharing my feelings in my writing and going into depth and staying in the scene for a long time. So I look to you as someone who's written 4 books already, for advice and counsel and help on that. And you're embarking on a very different sort of project right now, writing a novel after writing 4 cooking books. So tell us about that a little bit.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is, I mean, I think writing was also one of the primary things that connected us, and having writer friends has always been so important to me, because it is can be kind of a navel gazing job, and you can feel very much, speaking of being in a vacuum, like you can feel very much in a vacuum, in the solo pursuit of writing. And so finding other people who are in, nearby vacuums can be really helpful. I mean, I've always loved, I've always loved writing, and writing about cooking was my foundation as a chef and cookbook author. And then I was just sort of inspired by this story that I started as a short story and then ended up evolving into an entire novel, and really just came out of the practicality of having at the time one baby who did not allow me the free time and bandwidth to get inspired, shop, cook, photograph, write, all the recipes involved in writing a cookbook. So I sort of transitioned into novel writing. But it's an interesting angle to think about friendship through, because I spend so much time. I wonder sometimes, like, I get so jealous of my husband, who is a teacher, and now they're actually back in school, and he gets to go to a workspace and be around other grownups and interact with other human beings all day long. And I wonder sometimes if, as in love with writing as I am, there's a part of me sometimes that questions, like, maybe I should have picked something that involves other human beings, because even when there's no pandemic, spending a day taking care of little kids and then writing can leave you being a little bit removed from social interaction. So it's
a case of be careful what you wish for, right? It's all a balance, and it's all a series of trade-offs, because when you have to deal with other human beings and all of their nonsense and all of their insecurities and all of their, bizarre behaviors, and it's challenging. So, I've tried it all different ways, right? There was a point in my life where I had been working from home for a really long time and doing a lot of writing and for other people, being hired to write things for other people. And then I felt this need to go get out into an organization where I was interacting with other people. And I did that for a period of time. And then it's been really nice now to be back at home and not to have to do all that.
When you were my age and you had 2 little kids, what do you remember about friendship in your life? Like the roles that your friends played?
The first word that popped into my mind when you asked that question was lifeline. My friends were my lifeline. So I had friends with whom I would go for walks. That was sort of the thing. It would be like an hour or an hour and a half, because no one could spare any more than that amount of time. But I remember feeling like the women who didn't work at all did not understand, and maybe couldn't understand, the pressures and the pace at which you have to function to get it all in when you're working. And in this case, I was working in radio, so full-time doesn't necessarily mean 8, 9, 10 hours a day. It could have been, like at some ridiculous pace for 5 hours a day. And I was doing that starting at 5 a.m. because I was anchoring the morning news. And I remember feeling like I had people understood me better if they too were juggling a million things at once, and that I could complain and commiserate and all of that. Also, I remember very distinctly at that point in my life, we used to joke. I had a couple friends. We used to talk about HB, which was husband bashing, and it was complaining about our husbands. And then there were always people whose husbands were apparently perfect because they never had any single complaint. And, that got old because I didn't, my husband's terrific, but that doesn't mean there aren't things about him, As we've been married for another decade and another decade and another decade, I find that I don't complain anymore. But back then, I remember there were things. Who did what and how much did they do? And I'm sure this is probably sounding not entirely unfamiliar to you because you're at that stage of life where there's just too much that has to get done to keep the machine moving, right?
Well, it's kind of like one of the things, I never really thought of it this way until you said that, but one of the things that I really appreciate is the friends I have who understand, who know innately that I love my husband so much. And so when I complain about something, it is coming from a place of just wanting to vent, needing to process, not, I'm in a terrible place and want to divorce him, like not needing to pre-stabilize everybody with, and of course I love my husband, but oh my God, the dishes or whatever. It's not true. He's actually very good at doing the dishes, but you know what I mean? But it's like, that is always for me, that's always the sign of really great intimacy when somebody understands that the complaints are, or whatever I'm frustrated about is not some chronic problem that I actually need help with. It's just, this is such a weird time, balancing who does what. And that's sort of like the main theme is who's doing what and who's doing how much.
But you know what, Gabi? Marriage is hard.
It is hard.
Marriage is hard. It requires constant work, constant maintenance, and you pick your battles, right? And so sometimes there may be something that you feel like exploding at him with, but it's not worth it because you'd rather keep the peace. But that frustration in you needs an outlet. And that's another incredibly important role that friendship can provide. It can give you that release valve, right? Where you can go,
absolutely. And sometimes as a storyteller, I find that I actually get being able to kind of turn it into a story when I'm telling, about whatever it is that I'm frustrated about. That really helps. That helps me process it out. And then I'm less, I become so much less worked out about it. And I genuinely hope that he is doing the same and complaining about me and getting, a good audience for it.
Do you really care whether he is or he isn't? You need it. You're getting it. That's what matters.
Right. It's all about
me getting mine. And COVID.
Oh yeah.
That's it. That's all that matters.
Let's talk about COVID.
Let us talk about COVID, that word. It's so funny. In some countries, they don't even call it that. They call it the coronavirus. So it's going to be interesting many, many years from now to hear how. And what about 19? Remember, there was a number that was attached to this virus, too?
Yeah, 2019.
We tend to shorten things as it's COVID-19, but, like what about COVID-18? I don't know. But it 100% has had an impact on all of our friendships, I think, and in some cases for the good. What would you say? What have you noticed?
Well, I'm FaceTiming with people a lot more. I mean, I should say we, in addition to having two little kids, we also, Evan and I lived in San Francisco for the entirety of our relationship and my entire young adulthood. And we moved to the suburbs like 2.5 years ago, kind of about a year before the pandemic got started. And so the combination of being physically away from everybody and from most people, and also being in baby jail, as we call it, was already sort of removing us physically from a lot of people. And so what I found was I really did start, in the beginning, it was like Zoom cocktails on a regular basis with friends. And that didn't really last. We all kind of got tired of that. But I'm doing a lot more virtual when I can go for a walk or when I can get out. I pretty much always want to be talking to a friend. So I'm having a lot more phone calls with people who, I haven't been who I wasn't previously in quite so regular touch. And that's been really great. And then the other thing that has been great has been, the backyard visits. It's like because we're all so hungry for connection, we're actually making more time to have people, to go to people's backyards or to have people come be in our backyards. And I mean, thank God for backyards for me personally anyway. And, I think this would be so hard if we were still in our little apartment, without much outside space. So, and that's really what it's been like.
That, and also that you live in California, where we have weather that allows for outside gatherings so much of the year. I mean, we're moving now toward what hopefully will be a rainy season. We haven't had one in a while, but we're supposed to have one, and Lord knows we need it. So there will have to be more FaceTime, I guess, or scary indoor gatherings. I'm not sure. One of the things that I've noticed since the pandemic is that I can be as intimate with a friend who lives 3,000 miles away as I can with a friend who lives 1 mile away, because it doesn't really matter. All the communication is virtual anyway, and we've gotten so used to communicating on FaceTime and Zoom that we've allowed it to become intimate, right? That maybe before we reserved that intimacy for in-person gatherings and connection. And now, because we've had to go without in-person connection, we just bridged that gap and got intimate on these media. And was interesting, sort of guilty pleasure. Fred and I, my husband and I, love the American Idol and So You Think You Can Dance and these kinds of shows. Have I just admitted something embarrassing? I don't know. But in any case, we do.
I love it.
We have friends. Do you love it too? I love that stuff. I get so involved in everybody's backstory. Oh, okay. Good enough. Good enough. I'll take it. Love them. Love them. Like, stop everything when these shows happen. And, the big discussion is, do we tape it in advance so we can fast forward through the commercials? And what are we going to have for the popcorn? And, it's all very
for me,
ritualized.
That's
but
the Great British Bake Off.
Okay.
I live for a
we
background
all have
story.
These little guilty pleasures. Fantastic. So we actually watched American Idol with our good friends whose physical presence we were missing. And every Sunday night we would get together and we would, put an iPad there. And so that we were FaceTiming with them, we would shut off our mics during the show and then we would watch it live. So we had the commercials to debrief on what we had just seen. And this became a little ritual that we did all through the pandemic. And
oh my God,
it was a blast, but it was silly.
I love it.
But
and
we
that's
made
the
it
kind
work,
of thing,
right?
Well, you would never bother to do something like that if there weren't a global pandemic, because even if you weren't talking to them regularly, the potential of seeing them in person would be there. And so, it wouldn't cross your mind. But then it's almost like you get to deepen that friendship more than you would have if there weren't a pandemic.
I guess. So the question is, what happens now as we all begin to get vaccinated and get back out into the world, and hopefully, Lord knows when, but at some point we are going to actually, I think, be in a post-pandemic time.
God willing. Yeah.
Fingers crossed. Yeah. My mouth to God's ears type thing. But how are our friendships going to change?
Well, they've been saying, and I certainly, I think that this kind of